This is our second in a series of seminars for the Methods Block semester. And this morning, we have a great panel that is here. We have 7 individuals that will speak to you and share with you lessons learned from their first years of experience. They'll each, as they come up, get to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their experiences. And then at the end, we should have an opportunity for questions. So we'll hope that you'll give them your full attention and jot down questions as you go so that, since there's 7 of them, they might have quite a number of questions towards the end. All right? Okay. We'll let you begin and we'll let them introduce themselves as they go. Okay?
I teach kindergarten at Mary Branch Elementary. This will be my 3rd year teaching kindergarten. I absolutely love kindergarten. I love their expressions. I love what they do. And it's just the perfect job for me. I don't think that I would ever move into 5th grade. I don't think I'd ever go up higher than kindergarten because I just love it so much. I graduated from A&M with an early childhood degree in 2007. And I finished my master's in 2009. And I didn't go into the teaching field right after I graduated from my undergraduate because jobs are just not out there, so I did that first. Topics that I wanted to talk about today were teaching to the test, changes in society, and classroom management. Each teacher has methods that work for them and best to prepare for what's getting ready with their teaching. The best thing I can tell you is to get your feet wet and go out there and do some placements, go out there and do some substitute teaching. You never know what kind of job opportunities you're going to get. I did substituting in early childhood, high school, middle school, special ed, PE, everything, so that way I could know all the type of placements that were out there, and so I'd be prepared for all different areas. I did dual language, I did bilingual. And one thing that I learned from all those different placements is that there's a lot of classroom management strategies out there, and not all of them work for me. In my classroom, I'd use a chart system where everyone starts out on ready to learn, and they can move up. But they can also move their clip down if maybe they're having a bad day. But if they need to move back up because they change their day around, which is completely possible in kindergarten because they go up and down all day, that's fine. But they need to know that their day can change around. I also use conscious discipline. Raise your hand if you've used conscious discipline or you know what that's about. Oh, good. Okay. So in my classroom, I have a safe place, and the kids can go there to the safe place if they feel like they need to calm down a little bit. So they'll go into the corner, and they point. I have a safe place monitor. That's one of my classroom jobs. And they'll go and point to the picture of how they feel, and then they can calm down. They can use the balloon. They can use drain. They can do whatever they do to calm themselves down and come back to the lesson. And usually they only spend about 5 minutes there and they're ready to come back. So that's one of the classroom management techniques that I use is safe place. I also have classroom jobs. My first year teaching, I only had 5 jobs. I had the 5 handy helpers. That was a mistake. You need to have jobs for every student in your classroom because it builds that family in your classroom. Everyone wants to have a job. They want to feel important. So some of the jobs that I have the soap squirter, I have line leader, I have caboose, I have electrician, I have chair stackers, I have floor monitors, I have math job helpers, I have the big money job, which is someone that takes the money to the cafeteria in the morning so I don't have to handle the money all day long until lunchtime. I have the notes collectors, that way they don't keep bringing me notes all morning because they do that, even if it's a drawing that they brought. I have them put them in the note box, that way I don't have to do that. Let's see. I have a classroom helper is the best job. They all want to be your helper, so they're very excited when they get to be classroom helper. So that's 2 techniques that I use. When I'm using my techniques in my classroom, I make sure to think in my brain, will this really work for my kindergartners? If I can't explain it to myself, I can't explain it to them. So I have to make sure if I find a new method or if I go out there online and I see something new, that I make sure that I can explain it to kindergartners, because that's who I'm going to be using this system with. If I don't really understand it, or if I'm not sure that it will work, I go talk to my fellow teachers. You need to use your fellow teachers as a resource. They're there to help you. They're not there to make sure their classroom looks better than yours. They're there to be your helper and your guide. Classroom chants are another classroom management technique that I use. I want my students to feel like it's their family. I'm always telling them that it's hard for kindergarten, but not for the shirts class, because I want them to know that these are tough jobs and I'm asking them to do tough things, but they can handle it because we're a classroom family and we can do things together. Generally, you want to make your students feel really welcomed and a part of something, because you don't know what their home life is like. You don't know what experiences they've had, positive or negative. So you want them to feel included in your classroom and that you are the family of that school. Like I said, techniques work differently for different teachers, but they also work for different situations. Sometimes I'm called to be in a sub for a 5th grade class or a 3rd grade class, and I don't use a lot of my kindergarten techniques when I go into those classrooms. Instead, I use other vocabulary and other terms. I don't have to use smaller words. And that you have to know whenever you go into those classrooms is that each classroom is different, each situation is different, and each teacher uses different techniques. When I coach my swim team, because I coach a year-round swim club, I use some of my kindergarten techniques with my kindergarten swimmers, but I have to use other techniques with my older kids because I have 8th graders that are in my group. So I have a wide range, so I have to use all different kinds of techniques when I'm doing my swimmers. You have to also remember that if you implement a classroom technique, you might not see the fruits of your labor that day. In kindergarten, it takes almost 90 days for classroom management to sometimes be taken into effect. I had a student last year, he was in special ed, and I tried the marble technique, I tried the tally marks, I tried every 15 minutes I would check in with him so that way he knew that he was getting smiley faces all day. And it didn't take effect until December when he finally came in and he finally got party hat in his folder for his daily folder. And that was amazing, and he was so excited. And I called the mom and I called the grandmother. Everyone that I've been calling all year that I've been having problems with this child, I told them that, look, how great his day was. And finally, things started turning around for him. And he started learning all his letters. I was told at the beginning of the year that he would not learn to write his name, he would not learn his letters or his sounds. And at the end of the year, he knew all his letters and he knew all his sounds, and he could write his name if I told him which letters to write. So that was, a turnaround for him. So it took until December for that kid. This year I had a little kid that cried every single day. I mean, he would cry all day, and because all he did was miss his mom, and that's not wrong for a kindergartner, and especially since he was a young kindergartner. But from the very first day, I taught him balloon technique, I taught him pretzel, I taught him different techniques, and he's finally getting it. He finally comes in and he has a smile on his face and he's ready to go. And his thing that I have to do with him every day is I have to tell him what the day is going to be like. Okay, today we're going to do this and this and this, and then we're going to go to PE, and then we're going to go to science. And then he's excited because he knows what his day is going to be like, so that it helps him. So it took me about the first 6 weeks with this kid, and then he was finally ready to go. So you just have to implement a technique and keep going at it and keep going at it until it takes hold. So remember that, please. Testing. We do a lot of testing in schools. I don't know how many of you have got to administer TBRI or seen TBRI being administered. Okay, that's a big deal in kindergarten. DRA. Okay, I mean, we do testing. I think I haven't been in my kindergarten classroom even 1 week and we haven't administered at least one test. Because they need to have data on these kindergartners just like all the other grades. But you got to remember, the students that you have in your classroom when you're doing the testing. In kindergarten, I have to do one-on-one testing. They can't read the questions themselves. So you have to have a plan for all the other kids when you're testing. The older grades, you can administer in whole group and that's fine, but you gotta know your students, just like classroom management, you gotta know what your students are about. Additionally, the curriculum is getting a lot tougher. I remember whenever I went to kindergarten, many moons ago, that I knew my first name, I knew my last name, I could write them, I knew my letters, I knew my sounds, I could count to 100. You're still getting kids that can do that, but sometimes you're getting kids like the one I had last year who didn't even know how to color. I showed her how to rub the crayon on the paper and her eyes just got so bright because she had no idea that crayons did that. So you're getting those kids, but you're also getting these high achiever kids where parents have talked with them and they've gotten experiences and gotten to go to different places. So you're getting all these kinds of kids and you're having to test them all in this one thing. So you gotta just be aware of the range of your kids. And the curriculum is getting a lot tougher. I truly believe that the kindergarten curriculum that we have right now is first grade's curriculum from many years ago. Used to, we would do play and home centers and all those sort of things. I was so depressed because I had to get rid of my home center this year because they told us that it wasn't necessary. But it is. Those social skills are important. So the testing does affect even the lower grades, so be prepared for that. And similarly, preparing for school, you just have to remember the change in society with these kids. At the school that I'm at, it's 75% free and reduced lunch. So 3 out of 4 of my kids are on free and reduced lunch. I have 2 kids in my class that are homeless. So it's important to know your students and what experiences they have had, so that way you can build rapport with them. I give them homework assignments every Wednesday. They have to write their letters. And some of those kids came back with their paper and they said, I don't have a pencil at home, so I couldn't do my homework. So I sent them home with a whole bag of pencils, and the next week they had their homework because they had access to the materials that they needed to do their homework. So it's important just to know what your kids are coming from, what economics they're coming from, so that way you can help them the best. And that's it. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Allison. I was just kind of thinking about what Allison said too, and it makes me want to go home and talk to my new baby, some more, and start counting with him so I can get ready. My name is Russell Evans, and I teach methods here in college education. I teach the elementary methods block for social studies, and in the past I've done middle school as well. I'm a previous teacher. I taught high school, 9th grade and 11th grade U.S. history and world geography in Spring Branch ISD in Houston. I'm a class of 2007. Whoop. Is this on? I didn't even think this was on, I'm sorry. I'm a class of 2007 graduate in the College of Geosciences with a geography degree, and I also had my master's done by 2008 in the College of Education, and I had a master's in education with an emphasis in curriculum and instruction. What I wanted to talk about today are kind of some things Allison brought up too, but also just thinking about those things, it kind of got me thinking about other things too. But I mainly wanted to talk about relationships at school, because I feel like those school relationships, and I'm not just talking about like with your mentor teacher or things like that, but everybody at school. You think about the principal who you probably meet in like an interview and don't see again for a while until like some big faculty meeting or some large group meeting. Think about him getting on a first name basis with him or her, meeting those people in charge, and meeting everybody from the principal down to the assistant principal, associate principals, building principals. You've got a number of people at your school depending on how large or small your school is. If you're at a 1A district or 2A district, you might just have one person in each of those roles. If you're at a larger 5A district, there might be enough to count on your hands. It all depends on where you're at. But I think all those relationships are important, because when it comes down to retaining teachers, when it comes down to keeping your first year teaching job, and when it comes down to thinking about, who's going to be the best person in the classroom for the students, you're going to want somebody that knows not only your name, but also your face, and has maybe even been to your classroom, and invite them to come to your classroom. I kind of got lucky in my first year because I developed such a good relationship with my assistant principal that was responsible. She was actually my grade level principal, and she was responsible for coming to my room and observing me and rating me and all of that with the PDOS and everything. She was retiring that year, but I feel like she helped me because, I was getting on to kids and sending them, a few of them to her, and I had some classroom management issues and things like that at first. Within a month or two, we had those figured out, and she was like, without you there to help these new freshmen, who's going to teach them? And so I think about that for every grade level, in middle school and in elementary school. No matter where you are along the line, if you're not there for that student, if you're not there to instill in them good measures of discipline, good measures of management in your classroom, they all want to be managed. They all want to be, sort of handled maybe even better than they're handled at home. They want that framework in class, in their classroom. So if you can give them that, I feel like it's going to help them not only in elementary, but in middle, and then when they finally get to me in secondary. So form those relationships, get to know who your supervisor is, whoever's going to come into your classroom. It's not a scary thing maybe the first one or two times. You're always on edge a little bit because somebody's in your room. But it's good to have those relationships because then you get some sort of inside knowledge from outside the classroom, and it helps you to prepare and to get ready for when they come in and maybe when they visit with you at a faculty meeting or something like that. So that's kind of those leadership people. And you'll also meet those leadership people when you go to district-wide professional development or district-wide seminars. You might meet people from other campuses, maybe a campus you want to get to eventually, or maybe a campus you want to move to. I can't tell you beyond your school how important it is to get to know the policies and the people of your district as well. It's very important to get to know all of those people at every level because you never know when you might want to move to another school within the district, or you never know when you might need a letter or something from somebody else at another school, or maybe confide in somebody else outside of your school. It's just a good idea to get to know a lot of people. Going back to your school, if you think about the person who's there with you from day one, you're probably going to be assigned a mentor teacher. And that's somebody usually in your grade level or subject area if you're in middle school or high school. But it's that person that sort of gets what you're doing, knows what you're doing. Sometimes it might be somebody in a totally different department or grade level, but it's all chance and depending on who's available. When you think about that mentor teacher, think about this person as a new person, as a, not somebody you should put all of your trust in at first because you never know if you've got a good mentor or a bad mentor. It happens. Just be aware of what you're telling them. And just like anything your first year, you've got to just sort of learn everybody in and around school, kind of keep control of what you're saying, and just sort of listen more than you talk. Just so you understand the environment and kind of understand what you're walking into. You might be walking into a situation where the teachers are fortified against the administration. You might walk into a situation where everybody gets along perfectly. You might walk into a situation where the administration is sort of fortified against the teachers. You never know. So make sure you're aware of that and just kind of keep that under your hat as you're walking into meeting a lot of people for your first year. As I've kind of told some of the students in my blog, my mentor teacher was a very good influence on me, but she also talked a lot, and sometimes when you confide in people, those things are all around the school by the end of the day, whether it's from students, whatever goes on in your classroom. You might not be telling them anything directly, but maybe just subconsciously things flow out. By the end of the day, fifth graders might be coming to you, fourth graders, hey, I want to come to your classroom, or maybe people in your grade, or that other teacher, like I taught geography, other geography students from other classrooms heard what I was doing, and they wanted to come into my room, so they were going to their counselor to get moved and get things adjusted, and then I had all the teachers like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? That sounds like fun. Is that also in the TEEPs? So it's just kind of, it's one of those things you've got to be aware of, though. You've got to be lockstep in some districts, and you've got to be on track with everybody else to make sure that you're not, making everybody jealous, I guess, too. But also that mentor teacher can be good in a lot of ways. I know I was joking with my blog yesterday. My mentor teacher actually introduced me to my wife. It was her sister. So it's just kind of one of those things. Things can happen when you're working. You could go on a blind date and drive from Houston to College Station and meet your future wife. So it happens. Also, I think one of the things that blew the mind of a lot of people in my department was I went outside of my department, and I would say to those of you in elementary and middle to go outside of your grade level, but I went outside of my department and met people. And I had a really, cloistered group of individuals that I had to be at lunch in my exact seat every day and talk to them, or I was kind of excluded. So, I had to be there. And they started wondering, why was I going down the hall to talk to English? Or why was I going down across the hall to talk to science? How do I know so many people? How are you meeting these people? What good would that do? If you think about the college and career readiness standards, if you think about other standards in schools today, outside of just our TEKS, they call, and even our TEKS too, but they call for cross-disciplinary standards, And so not only was I being personable and maybe even making our department look better, and making some of the people that I had talked to people in science and English saying they could never get to our department head or other people in our department. Not only was I making our department look good, but I was also finding out what was going on in those other classrooms. So my freshmen, what were they doing in biology? And my freshmen in English, what were they doing in English 1? And I was able to pull from those lessons and kind of frame some of my social studies topics too around what was going on in those classrooms. So think about it this way. If you're in second grade and you're talking to third grade, talking to first grade, you kind of know where your students came from and where they're going. So it's not a bad idea to start talking to people, meeting people, even going outside your grade level. If your grade level is in sort of like a team like I was with my department, think about going outside and meeting a few more people than you normally would. I've also talked about this with my students too, but the last group of people I was thinking about at school, and I don't mean for them to be last, but they're of vital importance, are all the people that make the school hum and work seamlessly, from the custodial staff to the registrar, to the nurse, to the school psychologist, whoever you want to list on that list. Those people know, for example, janitors, they're in your classroom every day. They know if you've had a party, they know what you've thrown away. They also know if you're good to them, they're going to be good to you too. If you talk to them, if you say hi, I told my students, I had furniture, I didn't know where it came from. I had a beautiful desk, found out the principal was getting a new set, I got the old principal's desk. So while all my other teachers had, people in my department had old ratty furniture, I had new stuff. I had filing cabinets that looked like, those office suites that you'd buy at like Macy's or somewhere. And I mean, it was just very nice. I had people fighting over my stuff when I was leaving. Other teachers were like, who's getting Russell's desk? So it's just, it's one of those things you've got to be aware of. When you're meeting people, think about meeting everybody, because they're going to find stuff for you. They're going to return your kindness. And they're also going to be there if you need anything. So beyond just janitors and custodial staff, think about registrars, counselors. If you need some inside information on a student, or you want to know a little bit more about a student in order to maybe help them out and facilitate in their learning experience, they're going to be there for you. They're going to be more open to talking to you if you're talking to them. Also nursing staff, I think about students that had maybe attention problems, things like that. I was more apt to letting them go down to the nurse for a little while and just kind of cool off or whatever they needed to do, or take their medicine. I just kind of knew a little bit more about them than the normal teacher. So it's good and important to do all those things, because you could be at a large school or a small school, get around, meet people, and start learning how things work. And the last little thing on relationships I would say too is think about your community too. Every teacher that had been a long veteran teacher in my school, besides I can think of one who was my other mentor teacher, she's still teaching in the same classroom she's been in for about 44 years. She, with the exception of her and me and a few other new teachers, lived in the community that our school was in. A lot of teachers, if you think about Spring Branch, it's kind of down there by Memorial City Mall. A lot of teachers lived in Tomball, Spring, Cy-Fair. They lived south. They lived towards Pearland. They lived towards Baytown. They didn't live in Spring Branch. I mean, it was kind of expensive to live in Spring Branch if you're familiar with the area, but they could have lived in Katy. They could have lived a little bit closer. Unfortunately, they lived very far away. They didn't want to see, and I asked why. They didn't want to see parents. They didn't want to see students. When they were done with school, they wanted to be done. And I was just thinking about that my first year, and also concurrent years. And now, thinking about my future, it's important to be an active part of your community, be an active part of your school community. Students come from broken homes sometimes. They want to see you out. I went to Popeyes and visited students. I went to McDonald's and visited students. I went to their games. I went, and you might get some discounts too if you go see them at their work. But I also went to games. I drove buses. I had a CDL from A&M. I drove buses for the cheerleaders, for the band, whoever. I was there for my students. They were so happy to see me at those events. Some of them I was getting paid. I even worked detention on Saturdays. The hard to reach students, teachers were wondering, how are they working in your classroom? They're not working for me. I got to know them in detention. I got to know what they did. And you're laughing, but if you get to know them in those situations where they're maybe at their worst, they really sort of bloom for you, and they become more receptive to what you're selling them, and they respect you more. So I would say, be a part of your school, be a part of your community, get to know everybody. Those are all big things. I've just got some quick things to avoid. Things get around school quickly that I already mentioned. Understand your school policies and how they differ from your district policies or vice versa. Toxic teachers lounge, it exists. Toxic lunchroom, all that exists at my school, and I know it exists at other schools as well. Kind of a funny story, I taught geography, and you think about what a geography teacher needs. I needed colored pencils because we did a lot of maps. I didn't have a working pencil sharpener. And so I was going to go out and buy one, but before I could, I was at a more wealthy school, and kids started collecting money for me. And so as a joke, I just put a couple on my desk, and I said, if you got extra, whatever, because they were bringing change to me. They were like, we want that fancy pencil sharpener at Office Depot that costs $100. And I was like, okay. And so they would bring their change from lunch and just dump it in there and keep putting money in my desk. And before long, I had maybe, I don't know how much I had over $100. And so it got around school, and this was my first year. And my department head comes in and she tells me, Russell, you really, you're not supposed to collect money. And that's really against the law policies. And so she weaved a way for me to make it work. And there was this thing, we were the Stratford Spartans. And there's this thing every Christmas called Spartan Share. So my students kept contributing money. Before long, I even developed like a little system with each period, and they had a race to who had the most money. So not only was I went out and bought the pencil sharpener, but that money, we collected almost $1,000, and it went towards presents for some students that couldn't get presents. So it was a bad situation. I was like, I'm gonna get fired, I'm gonna get fired. And then it turned into something amazing. And all the students and the parents, whoever, I delivered some of those presents. And it was crazy to see where some of those students come from, and also to think how much you impacted them and all that. So it was a small thing that I thought was bigger than it was that actually became something really positive. So that was kind of funny. And just remember, don't collect money. And the very last thing, personal contact with students. It happens in high school. It happens in middle school. It happens in elementary school. Be aware of your distance to your students. I'm not saying don't give them an appropriate hug or anything like that if they approach you. I've had students just almost like catch me in the hallway when I'm not even looking and hug me. And I'm just like, like this. I'm not hugging back. And you just have to be aware of your personal space. I had teachers that would give out their cell phone numbers. I had students that would take teacher cell phone numbers off their desk and send text messages, things like that. Teachers weren't keeping, other teachers weren't keeping appropriate space. And you also want to be aware of after school, before school, who's coming into your classroom, leave your door open, make sure other teachers know who's there. If I had a girl student come in the morning to make up a test, I would tell my next door teacher I've got such and such in my room, and I'm gonna leave the door open, or would you mind coming in every 15 minutes and just checking on us? So it's a good idea to have somebody, because if anything ever came back to you, you could say, hey, Mrs. Such and Such or Mr. Such and Such also floated in, and they were there for me as well. So I hope these are some things that help you, just some things I had thought about as I was, wish I could go back and redo my first year. You always do, but you'll never forget it. You always know that you could be better in so many ways, but you would never also want to change anything from that first year because you learned so much. So if you have any questions, I'm sure we'll get to them at the end, so thank you.
Howdy. Hi. My name is Tracy Hodges, and I am also an instructor here now at A&M. I taught for several years. My first year I taught 9th and 12th grade in high school and absolutely loved it. And then after that I moved down to middle school and I taught 7th and 8th grade. I taught remedial levels, I taught honors, I taught pre-AP, I taught special ed. It's kind of the whole gamut, and I was also a cheerleading coach at the middle school level. So if you have questions about coaching, I know a little bit about that too. The first thing, kind of my entire spiel here, deals with taking advantage of opportunities that come to you. And that starts with whenever you go out to get a job. So I was an English major as an undergrad. Never ever thought I would be a teacher. No one in my family is a teacher. I don't personally know a lot of teachers other than my own teachers. So this was like, I'm never going to be a teacher, like, not going to do that. And I just kind of fell into it. Started with mentoring students as an undergrad, and then it moved into subbing, and I realized, oh my gosh, I absolutely love this. How could I not do this? But I wanted to teach high school. I wanted to teach literature, and I wanted to teach writing, and that was it. So I told myself I will never teach below 9th grade. And you all heard me say that I taught 7th and 8th grade. So the first year that I got a job, I taught 9th and 12th grade at the school that I had student taught at, was able to get a job there, and it was wonderful. But that was the time when they were kind of doing budget cuts for teachers, and if you're the last one hired, you're usually the first one out. And that happened to me. So then I was scrambling to try to find a job, and I wanted to work here in town, and it's a lot harder to get a job here in town as well. And all of a sudden, I looked on and saw that there was an opening for a 7th grade position. I was like, well, give it a try, because I need a job. I need money. I can't pay my bills. And that was what happened. So I went into this interview, and it was amazing. And I was like, wow, this is really good. But they're never going to offer me the job because I taught seniors, and I can't teach 7th graders. Well, I ended up getting the job, and I took it, and then foolhardily thought that 7th graders and 9th graders would not be very different. I was like, they're only 2 years apart. There's no difference. There's a lot of differences between a 7th grader and a 9th grader. They're so much smaller, and they're a bunch crazier. Like, they're way crazier. So be really flexible. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a certain grade level. Don't say, I only want to teach 1st grade. I only want to teach 2nd grade. Be really flexible with that, because you never know what kind of job is going to come up. And then you never know when you're going to get an opportunity to move. So I taught 7th grade, and I apparently loved it after the first year. At first it was really hard, and then I started to love it. And I kind of think of myself as having 2 first years, because my first year of teaching was 9th and 12th grade, so it was crazy. But once you move down like to a middle school and you're in 7th grade, it's a whole new first year all over again. But then I got to move up to 8th grade, which is what I ended up loving teaching the most. And I taught the same kids that year. So I taught my babies for 2 years in a row. So I did get to move. So don't pigeonhole yourself into a certain grade level. Take the job that comes, and then know that you can change at some point as you get some more kind of rapport in the school, and also just as you show that you can teach well. My second opportunity that you need to take advantage of is parents. So at every chance that you get to talk to a parent, take advantage of that. I don't know how many times there were parents that I wanted to talk to and I didn't get the opportunity to talk to them. Kids' phone numbers change all the time. Parents don't check their emails. Even if you text them, sometimes it's really hard to get a hold of them. If you were in my junior methods class last year, you've heard this story, but bear with me because I like it. I had a student that I never really had trouble with, but all of a sudden something happened because he was an 8th grader, and of course things happen, and he stopped doing his work, and I couldn't get hold of his dad. And one day I was driving home from school, and I was speeding. Don't do that, it's bad. And I got pulled over by a cop. And so this cop comes up to my window, and he starts talking to me, why were you speeding, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, I'm on my way home from work, and I'm really tired, and just wasn't paying attention. He goes, oh, where do you work? Told him where I worked at the middle school. And I looked at his badge and saw a last name that I was familiar with. And I was like, this guy kind of looks familiar. And so he was like, oh yeah, my son goes to that school. Is your son by any chance said the student's name? Yeah. Well, funny story. And we had a little parent conference right there. And he didn't end up giving me a ticket for speeding, which was also very good. But then going back to what Russell says, things like that get around school, and the next day at school, everybody knew. However, I got to talk to that parent because that was my opportunity. So when you see parents around, if you live in the same community, you can talk to them. If you see them at their place of employment, at the grocery store or wherever, talk to them. It's okay to be like, so how is your son doing? Did they do their homework tonight? Even something as simple as that. The third one, when I taught 9th and 12th grade, I taught at the high school, and I had a smart board, I had a cow, I had a computer in my room, I had everything. I had all the technology I could want, and I was so, so happy. When I moved to 7th grade at a new school, I was given a projector, an old school projector nonetheless, with a little pull-down whiteboard, and that was it. And I threw a tantrum. I went home and I was so furious. I was like, all I get is a projector. I was told to use technology in my classroom. I was told that that was good for students, but I didn't get that. So then I decided, well, I want technology. I'm gonna go find technology. The PTO usually puts out grant money that you can apply for to get technology in your classroom. If you do a quick Google search of grants for teachers, you will find a ton of stuff. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and most teachers don't know that that's out there, so there's not a lot of people applying for it. By the end of the year, I had 10 iPads for my classroom, my own personal iPad, a smart board, and a cow. I was like, you know, when Russell left, everyone wanted his desk. When I left, everyone wanted my technology. Because you can't take the technology with you, it technically belongs to the school. But I had all of this really cool technology, and I wrote grants to get that. We all have the skills to write. Get a couple of people to proofread it, team up with some of your teachers if you feel nervous about it, and get technology for a grade level even. But that way I had the resources that I wanted and that I knew my students needed. Go out and get them. Don't just wait for them to come to you, because they probably won't. And then the last thing is time management. So we've talked about classroom management, and everyone knows you're supposed to manage your classroom and manage your time really well. But I had no idea that an off period doesn't really exist. Like, as a middle school teacher, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I truly got my off period to work for myself. Between the hours of 8 and about 4:30, you have other teachers around who need things from you or who need to talk to you. You have students coming to you who need things. Your administration. Meetings come up all the time. ARD meetings, parent meetings, every kind of meeting that you can imagine. I would go to school at 6 in the morning, and I would work in my classroom from 6 to 7, and that was the only quiet time I had at the school the entire day. That was my off period. Also, in my school, there was a shortage of subs. So at least 2 or 3 times a week, I was subbing for someone else's classroom on my off period, which meant that I just never got the time to work for myself. Well, at first, the beginning of my teaching, I was taking stuff home, and then I was being the worst roommate in the world, because I was sitting there all the time grading things and planning lessons, and I had no free time. If you manage your time well, and even if that means you have to go to school at 6 in the morning to have an hour to work, do that. Because then when you leave school, you're done. You don't have to take your grading home, you don't have to take the lesson planning home, and you can still have a real life. Because if you just work, you're gonna burn out really, really fast. You need to take advantage of all those fun opportunities, because most of you look like you're probably pretty young and wanna go out and see movies and wanna go hang out with your friends, and you wanna do all kinds of cool things. Do those cool things. They also make you a better teacher, because your students don't want a teacher that they can't talk to about anything. They want to talk to you about the cool new movie that came out. They want to talk to you about the Aggies winning the football game. And yeah, that's right. That's what they're going to do tomorrow. And if all that you've done is work, you won't be able to talk to them about all of those things. Also, in order to manage your time a little bit better, don't grade everything. Do not grade everything. You don't have to. So a lot of times for my students, if it was something that I wanted them to do that was completion, I could give them a check and give it back to them, and I could just skim over it and make sure that they did it. They didn't have to grade every single answer. If you're an English teacher and you're going to be grading essays, don't grade every little detail in it. It will take you 2 hours to grade an essay, and if you have 100 of them to grade, you're not going to do anything else. So what I would do for my essays is we would have a focal point. So I would show them, we would go through the process of the essay, and I would say the focal point of this essay is your introduction. I am going to grade that introduction like there's no tomorrow, and I'm going to skim the rest of your paper for other things. And then the next paper, okay, remember your introductions? They still have to be rockin', but now I'm gonna check for making sure that you use commas correctly. And then you're looking really intensely for one thing, but then you're grading the entire paper holistically. That way you're not spending an eternity and students are still getting all of the good feedback that they need from you. As Allison said, she has classroom jobs. I also had classroom jobs. If you can delegate things in your classroom to your students, do it. I had a student whose job was to stand at my front, or the front of my classroom every day with my iPad, and as students came in, they took attendance and submitted it for me. I had a student whose job was to hand out the warm-ups every day. I had a student who was supposed to make sure that my front table was neat and organized because it drove me crazy if it wasn't. I had a student whose job was to hand back papers. So the first thing that student did is come in and look in the graded paper folder. If there was something in there, they passed them back. So my classroom ran like a well-oiled machine, and then I got to start teaching right when teaching was supposed to happen, and I didn't have to do all those administrative kind of tasks. Why not let the students do it? They can do it, and if you train them, they will do it appropriately. And then it also, like Allison said, it builds that community in your classroom. So you actually have a classroom where the students care about each other and what happens. And when someone's absent, they see how that affects them, and you also have less attendance problems, typically. Oh yeah, and then my last thing is don't give up on a student and don't give up on teaching no matter how hard it gets that first year. So I'm gonna tell you a story about a student. We're gonna call him Anthony, it's a pseudonym. This child drove me crazy. He broke things in my classroom. He would stand up in the middle of lessons and start dancing. He would do you'll think it's crazy, he would. He did everything under the sun to make my life miserable. I came to find out that this student was in a remedial block with me, but he was so brilliant. I was like, there's something wrong here. This kid does not need to be in remedial class. So I started getting the pre-AP work from the other teachers and said, here, you're gonna do this pre-AP level work, let's see how you do. So he was doing that, and all of a sudden he was pretty happy, but he was still misbehaving in my classroom. I was like, what can I possibly do? Tried strategy after strategy after strategy. So then as a first-year teacher, I thought, what if I bribe this child a little bit? And so we did a chart that he had to earn stickers, and with the child, we sat down and we said, here's what you have to do every day in order to get a sticker. When you get this many stickers, you'll get a prize. And that seemed pretty fair to him. So I said, okay, well, what kind of prize do you want? What's gonna make you behave in my class? And he goes, you know those little like chocolatey things that have like rice in them and caramel? A Star Crunch? Yeah. You want a Star Crunch? Yeah. The little one or the big one? Well, probably the little one. A little Star Crunch. That's it. Okay. So we tried this system. All of a sudden, he was getting stickers every day, and he was behaving, and something just snapped. So after so many stickers, I gave him the Star Crunch, and then we started to kind of dial down. You have to do more now to get a sticker. It's not just these minimum requirements. You have to do more, build it up. And at the end of the semester, we decided that he needed to be moved out of my class and moved into pre-AP. He got moved into pre-AP, and he came to me right before the Christmas break, and he said, I'm getting moved into pre-AP. If I get all A's on the next 6 weeks, can I have another Star Crunch? Yes. Yes, you can have another Star Crunch. And at the end of every 6 weeks, he would come to me with his report card that would show his A's, and we ended up finding out that this child also had ADHD and needed to be put on some medication, so that happened. It completely turned his life around. But for the first probably 3 or 4 weeks of school, I went home in tears almost every day. My roommates would meet me at the door with, food and, be like, here, we're so sorry about Anthony, and we would sit and have a cry fest. But this child turned things around, and not too long ago, this is actually, I live near the high school. I actually live in between the 2 high schools in College Station, and one day I was driving during the morning, rushed into school, and I looked over and I was like, that kid is Anthony. That kid is Anthony! I didn't even think this kid was gonna make it out of my class, and he's in high school. So don't give up on your kids, and think outside the box in terms of motivating them, because a stupid star crunch motivated this kid and completely changed things. So take every opportunity that you can, and I'll feel free to ask questions or answer questions after this.
Good morning. You guys are asleep still? Anyone awake? No? Okay.
I'm awake.
Trace is awake. Anyone else? I don't want to say howdy. I'm not from here.
Say it.
Howdy. Howdy. Here we go. Okay. So my name's Catherine Wright. I am now a PhD student here, and I was a teacher prior to starting my PhD. I got my undergrad degree at a really tiny college. The entire undergrad population could have fit in this room. Up in Boston, and it was in English and history. And then I went, that was fun, now I need a job. So I decided to put that off for a year, so I did a 1-year intensive master's program in Boston at Northeastern University and got my teaching certification. And when I was doing that, I said, much like Tracy, I was like, I'm going to do high school. I like history, I want to talk about history, and that's it. But I'm sure most of you guys are facing this too. Jobs weren't that great at the time, so I said, I'll get certified in middle school, just as a backup plan. The way it works in Massachusetts, you get 9 through 12, and then you can get 6 through 8 as a separate certification. So, backup plan, I'm gonna get this history degree, or this middle school certification. And second backup plan, I'll get certified in English as well. Well, my first job offer was 8th grade civics. All right, I hated civics as a student. I hated government. I hated everything that had to do with it. So I was like, I'm not taking this job. And then I thought about it for a second, and much like Tracy, realized, well, I have to pay my bills, and now I have the student loan thing, so I took it. And I never left middle school. Is there anyone here who's crazy enough to think they want middle school? Yeah, they're awesome. They're so insane, you will never be bored. So, my student teaching, and when I was an undergrad, I worked in the schools in the Boston Public Schools, which is a very unique experience. I grew up in New Hampshire, which is that little state up at the top near Canada, which is that country up north. So coming down to the Boston Public Schools, it was a little bit strange, but I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about. And Dr. Hammer said to folks, what do you wish you had known as a first-year teacher? And I realized I could have stood here all day and talked to you, but really my big thing was parents. I screwed up in just about every way possible in parent relations my first year teaching. So I'm going to tell you what I've learned, and hopefully you can make different mistakes with parents. So working in Boston was kind of a weird situation. A lot of the parents worked 2-3 jobs or didn't speak English, so you didn't have a lot of parent communication. But at the same time, you know, Russell was talking about this great relationship he had with his principal. I didn't have that at the school I taught at for my student teaching. We had a principal, but he was actually the principal of 2 schools. One school was in Boston, and the other was in China. I'm not kidding. So he split his time between the school in Boston and the school in China. So he wasn't all that useful. The first time I ever called home, though, I had a student acting up in the classroom, and I finally got together. I was like, I'm gonna call home. I'm gonna come home. And I was very nervous. And so I pick, they call home. Someone picks up and goes, hello? And I said, hi, this is Catherine. I'm calling from the Josiah Quincy Upper School. And he goes, no English. And I went, what do I do? And then this parent lists off, he had about 4 children, lists off their names, and I said which name was mine. He goes, good, bad. And I said, bad. And he goes, okay, and hung up. So I was like, great, parents are fantastic. Found out real quick that was kind of an odd experience. So I had this perception that to have a good relationship with parents, I needed to be in charge. I had this authority somehow, and if I just kind of stood up confidently and said, your child has been bad, everyone would listen to me. And it was a hot mess. I alienated myself from a lot of parents. So first year it was kind of damage control, but here's some stuff I learned. I had a teacher next door to me who wasn't my official mentor, but who became my life mentor pretty much. And she told me to think about parents as partners, that they are your partner in education and teaching. And if you keep this in the back of your mind, even if the parents don't think they're your partner, it goes so much better. So parents don't really want to work with you, not all the time. I try to go into it with the idea that like, parents probably like their kids, probably want what's best for them. We might disagree on what's best for them, but they're not sitting here actually actively trying to make my life horrible. They are generally trying to defend their kids. I mean, a lot of times, the way I don't have children, but the way I think about it is I really like my cat, and if someone was to insult my cat, I'd be pretty annoyed. So I think about parents, it's like, well, they actually have children, they probably like the children more than the cat, so I have to be careful on how I say things. I know this sounds crazy, but this is truly how I think about it. Tracy knows, like, this is how nuts I am. So I'll give you an example. Once I got my stuff together, I had a mother in the first 6 weeks of school. I had given her son a 0 on assignment, and he was in 6th grade, and I have a strict policy. If something's over a week old, you don't get to make it up. End of story. So after school one day, this mother comes marching in with her son, another child in the class, and that child's mother. That child had missed a different assignment, which I had allowed students to make up, totally different scenario. So she marches in and goes, I want to know why she got to make up an assignment and my child did not. Okay. Now, at this point, I figured out how to handle these situations. So I just explained to her, I was like, well, I don't really want to discuss this child's grades in front of someone else. And the other mother said, no, it's okay. We want to know why you're treating them differently. All right. So obviously confrontational. And I just said, okay, well, the assignment you're discussing, all children got to make up, and so it was a different situation. And that's why I handled it differently. And I said, well, her son was doing all his homework for his other classes, but wasn't getting my homework done. So what was I doing? So I just turned to the young man and said, I don't know. Can you please explain to me what other teachers are doing so that I may do it for you to help you do better? And this boy, because I had the homework posted, he just wasn't doing his homework. He was a 6th grade kid. In front of his mother, he then sits there and goes, no, you actually give us time to write down our homework, and you make it really clear, and I'm just not doing it. And so then I turned to the mom and said, okay, so what can we do right now to help your son? And suddenly everything changed. All right, she was like, you've got a good point. And suddenly it was no longer my fault that her kid wasn't doing his homework. Amazingly, it was his fault. But you just have to find a way to kind of ignore the anger. Don't be rude about it, but just don't engage in it. Because, like any other type of argument, if someone's yelling at you and you yell back, what happens? Well, they yell louder, right? Okay, so if a parent comes in angry and you face them with more anger, they're just going to get angrier. Ignore it, all right? You want to document everything. And I know you've heard this a million times, but come up with a system that works for you. My system was I had a folder for every kid at the beginning of the school year, and every note, everything that I got just got put in that folder. If I called home, I actually wrote it on the folder because then it can't get lost. You want to make sure you have that document, so if you ever have to cover yourself, which you will at some point, even if it's as simple as, the parent pulls you over, or the school I work at didn't have buses, so I would go out to cars as parents were picking their kids up and be like, hey, such and such happened. Just jot it down. It doesn't need to be brilliant, just so you know it happened. Do not be afraid to call home. Have any of you guys had to call home yet? No? Okay. Yeah. First time you do, one. All right.
It was just to ask them if kids could stay after.
Okay, so you haven't had to call, which can be kind of stressful, but the first time you have to call home for a bad reason, it's nerve-wracking, to say the least, because, you don't know what the parents are going to say. Don't be afraid, but watch your tone. If you call home and say, your son is being a jerk face in class, you're probably going to get faced with a little pushback. If you call home and start with, I'm really concerned. This is happening in class and I am worried your child is missing out on the content. What can we do? What can I do to help him? Do you think it'd be great if the three of us sat down and discussed it? If you come from a place of concern, you're going to get a totally different reaction than, please, would you punish your child at home so I can stop dealing with this? You're going to get a different thing. I want you, I had really good luck with email addresses because it kind of provides you with that documentation right away. You don't have to do anything, but be able to stand behind every word you put down, okay? I'm going to tell you a little story from my first year, from the biggest hot mess of the hot messes of parent interactions that I had. This was an ongoing problem. I had a student completely plagiarize something like copy and paste it from the internet, which you get with middle school because they think they're brilliant and that you don't know what Wikipedia is. So I emailed the mom and said, hi, I just want to let you know your child copy and pasted this. I think part of it, and it was a first time offense. I was going to give her another chance, but wanted mom to know. So mom emailed me back and said, thank you so much. Could you please send me a copy of it so I can sit down and discuss it with her this evening? And I'm like, great, this is going fantastic, right? Sounds good? Okay, so I replied back, thank you so much for your support. I don't think your child meant to cheat, but I think she just doesn't know how to summarize. And there's been some other situations, and again, don't think they're meaning to cheat, but we're gonna fix this, okay? Does that sound bad? What's the problem?
I don't think
Cheat. I said cheat. So then I got an email back that was CC'd to the principal, the superintendent, and the director of special education for the district, explaining to me that cheat is a very strong word and that I better be able to stand behind that before I start accusing students of cheating. So be careful. Okay? And the child did cheat. She copy and pasted. It was cheating. But you know what? The superintendent does not want to hear about that stuff. So be careful. And so again, words make a big difference. Do not say your child is acting out in class. You want to say your child appears to be having difficulty focusing. All right, I know it sounds nuts, but the big difference, if you are reporting an observation, like I am just seeing this, your child appears to be struggling with this concept. It's a big difference than your child can't do their stuff. All right, and you're going to get a big difference back. I know it sounds nuts, but these make a huge, huge difference. And always explain what you are going to do to help. I see that your child appears to be having trouble with this. Here's what I am going to do. Start off with what you are going to do and how you are sacrificing everything from yourself. Make contact when you don't need to, for good and bad reasons, okay? Most districts now have these policies where you have to call home every 6.5 minutes to report grades if the child's failing. It's annoying, okay? But at the same time, if you have a student who normally does their homework and they miss 2 assignments, drop an email and just say, hey, I noticed this change. Want to make sure everything's okay. When you establish those kind of calls that you don't have to make, it kind of builds a relationship with the parents and they're going to trust you more. Also, contact them when the kids do something awesome and not just academically, okay? When you see a child who's normally one of the popular kids, go start working with one of the special ed kids and taking time and patiently helping, send the parents an email, let them know hey, I saw your kid do something awesome today. All right? They don't hear that stuff. They only ever hear when the child is being a bully or getting bullied. Okay? So let them know when their kids are standing up and doing the right thing. Again, I said ignore anger, accusations, frustrating, everything like that. It's really kind of fun just to see how much you can pretend not to notice. You can almost make it into a game of how much can I sit here and calmly smile. Just almost in your head, ignore the tone that they're sending at you and just listen to the words. Make sure they know you are hearing their concerns and you're very aware, but any of that passive aggressive stuff you're gonna get, it's not there. And the last thing I just want to say is you want to make sure you always end on a positive note, any communication, okay? No matter how frustrating it's been, talk about what you're going to do. I actually, my last year teaching, I was at a school that had Saturday detention, and I had Saturday detention duty that week, and I was rather frustrated because I had about 15 students. All smart kids were all failing because they just had decided not to do their homework in 6 weeks. So with the principal's permission, I gave them all Saturday detention. Every single last one of them. So, well, I'm gonna be here, you're gonna be here with me, and we're gonna sit here for 4 hours and get your work done. So you'll pass my class. And I had a mother who was very angry about this because in her mind, it was her child's decision not to do his homework. Which it was. But she didn't want to give up her Saturday to have to drive him in. So she came up to me at the end of this day and she was yelling and screaming, and I just pretended I didn't know she was yelling and screaming and said, yes, you're right. So this is a concern. So I am going to sit here on my Saturday for you and for your kid, which I was going to do anyway, for you and for your kid, and get that work done, and then we're going to be good. I mean, how can you argue with that? I mean, you can't. Like, I'm giving up my time. I know it stinks. What I always did just to kind of cover myself, at the end of my emails, I always put something along the lines of, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to working together to ensure your child's academic success. And again, so you're ending, no matter what you said, with you and I are working together, we have the same goal. And it implies that you might disagree with me, but no parent is going to sit there and say, no, I don't want my child to be academically successful. So, do those things and that'll be one less problem you will have. You'll have other ones though, and it's going to be okay. That's all I can say. All right, thank you.
Howdy. Howdy. My name is Jennifer LeBlanc, and I was a middle school math science major here at Texas A&M, and I graduated in 2007. I did my student teaching overseas with the Department of Defense, and I just want you guys to know that there are other schools out there besides just a regular K-12 public school. When I came back, being a middle school math science major with an ESL certificate, I didn't have a problem finding a job. I was offered 3 jobs. One at an elementary, and I decided, no way, I can't deal with kids crying. I was offered a job at a middle school that would have been great, but they were gonna have me teach with a cart. So I'd go science class to science class on a cart and teach that way. Or I was offered a job at an alternative school. There's all different types of alternative schools. And the first type of alternative school is a school of choice. And it's typically a school where students go because they just want to accelerate through their classes and have a different instructional method with a little more autonomy. Type 2 alternative schools are discipline schools. That's where I taught. I taught at the local DEAP, which is the Discipline Alternative Education Program, and it was fabulous. I had an amazing time there. And every district in the state of Texas is mandated to have a DEAP. So I really encourage you to consider alternative school placements. One of the main things that I really liked was the student size, the class size, was 1 to 15. That's a mandate at an alternative center. Another thing that I really liked was the autonomy. I was by myself as a science teacher there, and I was able to decide how I was going to teach lessons. I had to follow the district scope and sequence because my students were coming and going, but I got to decide everything about my classroom, and I didn't have to worry about a science team coming in and saying, oh, you're having too much fun, you need to level that back some. So that was kind of nice. One of the other things was rotating students. Every 30, 45 days, I always had new students, which was really great. Is that a little bit better? Okay, sorry. Also, test scores. There's a lot of testing pressure that you get, especially starting in 8th grade with science. I didn't have that pressure because all the test scores went back to the home campuses. So where these students came from, I could get them 2 days before the test. Well, that test score went back to the home campus. So I prepared as much as I could for those tests. And again, like I said, I followed the curriculum, but I didn't have that intense pressure. I stayed at the Alternative Center for my full 5 years of teaching, and it was really great. So I really wish I had known to look at alternative opportunities for teaching. So that was one of my big first things coming out of A&M is, where should I teach? And alternative schools are a great option. Being at an alternative school, I have a lot of unique, I wish I had known. I wish I'd known more ways to advocate for my students. Being at, kind of like Tracy, I had just chalkboards. And the first probably semester from August to December, I didn't know what to do. I was going to these curriculum meetings and they were talking about the different science lessons we should be teaching, and I was like, well, don't have that, what do I do? So finally I decided to step up and just start asking the questions. I went to the district science coordinator and just started asking her for materials. And if you're not advocating for your students, then who is? So instead of just throwing your hands up and saying, well, can't teach that lesson, that was probably my biggest regret, is I spent so much time just following what the previous teacher had done because I didn't have the materials. You can do one of two things. You can complain about it and just keep doing what everybody else did, or you find the grants, you write the grants. Donors Choose is fabulous. Go to professional developments outside the district. Like at the regional service centers, they give you tons of free stuff. I got over $500 worth of science equipment just by going to the educational regional service centers. So that's one thing that you really want to get involved in. And then know your content area conferences. For example, the National Science Teachers Association. If you're going to be a science teacher, get involved with that. They'll offer you free professional development. They'll fly you for free to where their national conference is. You just have to get involved in those things. In Texas, we have CAST every year. It's a huge science teacher conference, and this year it's in Houston. Get to know your content area conferences, because those are where you're going to get tons of free materials, and they're all instructional, and they're really good for understanding different ways to teach in the classroom just outside of your district professional development. So also, being at the Alternative Center, my first year teaching, I wish I would have been more reflective on myself as a teacher. I had a lot of that deficit ideology where I was, oh, the students don't care. They're at the discipline center. They don't care about their school. They don't care about what they learn. I can't do anything. By December, I was in tears. I was blaming the students, and I realized this isn't working. You have to reflect on yourself. I came back to A&M to get my master's in urban education, and thinking about, you always, in your field methods classes, you're always writing down those reflections for your professors. They're useful, because taking that time to reflect back on how you're teaching and what you can do better is really important. That being said, if there's an incident in a classroom, say a kid cusses you out, it's going to happen. They're going to have bad days, especially in middle school when they're, hormonal. They're going to cuss you out at some point. Decide whether or not you're going to press charges against that student, because you will be asked by the assistant principal or the principal if you want to press charges. Reflect on what you did that day. Reflect on how that's going to impact the students, and decide whether or not that's an actual good option. Think about where that student came from that day, maybe what you did to engage the student in a negative way. I had it happen probably twice in my 5 years at the alternative school, where I was asked if I wanted to press charges, because there's students can get tickets for cussing out a teacher, cussing out another student, or also just disrupting instructional time. So if you're really mad at a student, wait a day or two before you decide to press charges against that student for that action or whatever it is. Take that time to reflect on your practices and what could have happened maybe a little better. And then Catherine kind of touched on this. Ask the student, well, what can I do to make it better? Always bring it back on yourself instead of blaming the student. I think that was one of the biggest things I learned in my first year teaching. And just know you're gonna cry. It just happens, especially when you're getting cussed at and you're like, what am I doing? So, one of the other big things, of course, going into the Alternative Center, I wish I realized that my purpose wasn't to save students. I couldn't save them from their decisions. I thought that when I first got there. I thought that I could just make the world a better place and keep these kids out of jail and do everything I could. I worked with one student for 3 years, from 6th grade all the way through 8th grade. And of course, he came back in high school as well. And as I was working with him, I went to his football games. I called his mom for every positive event that happened in the classroom. When he was in after-school tutoring, the student was amazing. And we get through 8th grade, and then he goes on to high school, and he ends up in He ends up going to jail for a race riot at the high school. And you kind of reflect again, and you're thinking, well, what could have I done better? You can't save them all. You can't go in thinking that you're there to save the world. You have to go in to encourage and engage the students in that area. Try and do everything you can to be the best teacher you can be. So at the end of the day, they can be like, man, science is really interesting. Maybe there is an alternative decision I can make besides this. So you can teach decision making. You can teach about other decisions. So that's why it's really important to link your content area to career choice. I always brought in career choices every day. We read the Houston Chronicle every day so they could see how science was connecting out to their local area. But just know that engage them in the content. Don't try and save the world. One thing I wish I would have had more of a reality check on. So again, like I said, I really enjoyed teaching at the alternative school, but another thing I wish I would have known more about my first year was gang culture, drugs, and alcohol abuse. The majority of middle school students came to me for drug abuse, most often prescription, for selling their Adderall or something like that. So it was really interesting to have little bitty sixth graders who, probably couldn't hurt anything or do anything, but they just were selling their Adderall because they thought that that was funny. Well, these are students coming from regular campuses. So these are things that as teachers, if you don't go to an alternative school, you have to be aware of if they're carrying their medicine, make sure it goes to the nurse. Or just be aware of every little nuanced behavior that there could be. So digging in their shoe, they might have hidden something down there in their shoe. We always had to check shoes because that was one of the students' favorite hiding spot. So you just want to be aware of kind of things that are going on. And then regarding gang culture, they start recruiting for gangs as little as 4th grade. And again, unless you don't know what to look for, one of the biggest things is their writing, their handwriting, because that's the first thing they teach when you're being recruited is you learn the symbols and the handwriting of the gang. So my best advice is, and this is, again, this isn't just exclusive to an alternative school. My kids were coming from a regular campus in a large suburban district. So it's out there and you just want to be aware. Get to know your gang counselors. Get to know your community service worker that works at the school. And they actually have, and you can look these up, they actually have gang counsel trainings for teachers. So teachers can be aware of what things to look for. Again, that being said, don't try and judge all your students thinking that they're in a gang. So they're not. But just be aware that they do start recruiting pretty young, and some of them are just gonna wanna do the whole wannabe thing. And so you just have to be aware. Know what battles to pick. I wish I'd known that more a little bit when I started teaching. If they don't have a pencil, don't yell at them. Don't get upset with them. Just give them a pencil. If they're not doing their work because they're hungry, hand them a granola bar. Say, okay, now you're not hungry, keep on working. So know, again, which debates are worth getting into in the classroom. Always be consistent with them as well. And again, I think Catherine kind of touched on this. You want to be consistent because a student will come to you and say, why are you treating that student differently? So the only way to be consistent is have your expectations very clear. And don't assume that your students know what the expectations are. Because respect to someone within a gang culture is different from respect in a teaching environment. So you kind of want to teach them how to code switch that respect word, how to be in the classroom, what the expectations are in that classroom, and be consistent. It takes, and this, you were talking about this with the kindergartners, it could take, weeks before they start to understand the expectations for that classroom, but they have to get used to your classroom culture as well. So know what battles to pick, understand that my student who was there on the second day, I can't expect him to know everything about my classroom culture. So if he messes up or she messes up, I'm not going to send that student to the discipline room right away. I'm going to give them time to get used to the expectations. Always stay positive. No matter what expectation you're enforcing, always say it in a positive way, because they'll be yelling at you or cussing at you, but if you just smile, they're like, what is wrong with you? You have to be crazier than the crazy. So if you just keep, you really do, if you just keep smiling at them when they're cussing you out, you're just like, why is she smiling? Like, how crazy is she? And then they just kind of calm down because they can't help but laugh at you. So give them something to laugh at, because it'll just calm down the entire situation. I wish I'd known to be prepared with an instructional contingency plan. Halloween, full moon, lights go out. I don't have windows in my classroom, none. And I don't have the little light that turns on in the middle, the emergency light. So my room's completely dark. What do you do with 20 kids that are, you have an assistant, but what are your instructional contingency plans? You, again, can't just throw up your hands and say, well, lights are out and the kids are crazy because it's Halloween. Let's just go sit outside. You always have something. I started talking about electricity, where electricity comes from. And we just wrote on paper, had a big piece of butcher paper and markers, and we went outside. Always have something in your back pocket. Always have the sub-plans laid out and have those ready for you to grab in case something happens. And just kind of be aware. And, okay, this one, it's not necessarily special for an alternative school, but it's something I wish I'd known. How to teach with a sign language interpreter. Our discipline center was the only one that serviced deaf education students. So if a deaf ed student got in trouble at any of the campuses in the Houston surrounding area, they came to our center, and we had sign language interpreters in and out. And there's a huge shortage of sign language interpreters, so you don't always have the same one. Get to know that interpreter. Learn not to talk as fast, because they're the ones who's actually teaching that student. That's something that I was never told to think about. And you have to start to be more aware if you're going to play a video. You have to let the interpreter know ahead of time if it has subtitles or not. And you need to be aware of how much information you're putting on the PowerPoint. And especially in science with hands-on labs and having an interpreter and group work, you have to teach, because the interpreter is not a content specialist. So you have to kind of have a training session or teach the interpreter what the goal is for the day so they can be there for the student interpreting the group conversations. That was really my last point, and I know that last one was a little random, but the biggest thing I can say is consider alternative schools. They're a great place to go. Be caring, be reflective, and be an advocate for your students. So that's it.
So I got here this morning and they looked around and said, oh, we need an old guy on the panel. So here I am. Well, I've been vigorously writing notes over here, and as these five who have preceded me have talked about everything, I've just been marking them out. So I have nothing to say. Aren't you happy about that? Not really. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stephen Schuyler. I am a PhD student here. And to tell you a little bit about my history, I'm about the last person that I would have expected to be standing here in front of pre-service teachers. I was a biology major, both bachelor's and master's degrees. And actually when I started my master's program, I chose the particular field, at the time it was wildlife science, I changed later on, but I chose that because I didn't want to deal with people. I can just go out in the woods and do my thing and not have to worry about people. So since that time I've taught and been a principal and deal with people all the time, but I will tell you this, that teaching, being involved in education has been the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. And that is why I'm back here now. And as I said, these five, and it would have been six if Mr. Lyons would have gone, are just horrible to follow with all the great things that they tell you. But there are a couple of things maybe that I could add from a principal perspective, and maybe if I can remember way back to when I first taught, I can share something about that. But thinking about interviews, how many of you are already thinking about where you want to teach? Give me a little feedback. What are some things that you think about that you need to be ready for in an interview? I'm sorry, classroom management.
How to make yourself stand out.
How to make yourself stand out. Okay. Anyone else?
Knowing the specifics of the grade level that you're interviewing for.
Okay, knowing specifics about the grade level.
Knowing about the district and their mission statement and the community.
Okay, about the district, mission statement, and community. Excellent.
Kind of getting a feel for what types of teacher the principal's wanting.
Okay, what types of teacher the principal's wanting? Yeah, as a former principal, absolutely.
Knowing your own personal philosophies.
Knowing your own personal philosophy statement. Okay, good. Anyone else? Just to share a few things from a principal's perspective, and everything you said is absolutely true. You need to know, first of all, who you are as a teacher and know philosophy. But let me give you this suggestion. Somebody mentioned standing out. One of the things that I always look for in these interviews, and what made teachers stand out to me, is how personal the interview became. And I don't mean personal as in squishy and all that kind of stuff. When you talk about a philosophy statement, a philosophy statement can be very drab, very boring. And if you just memorize that in your head and regurgitate it back, it doesn't come off very well. Think of ways that your actual teaching style is going to come through that philosophy. In other words, think of particular situations that you've been in, maybe in your field experience or so forth, that really makes that particular philosophical point come out for a principal. Because one of the things I always look for is I'm entrusting this teacher to a classroom full of students who, for the most part, their parents love them, want them to do well, as those who have talked before me have talked about. So I have to have a certain level of trust that when I put them in that classroom, that there's going to be some personal interactions, and there's going to be a personality that comes out, and it's not just content and teaks and all those things. Again, not saying that those aren't important, but that's one thing that I really look for. And one of the things that, even just taking a tour with a new teacher around the campus and showing them things, one of the things I was always interested in is how do they respond when students come down the hall? If I had a teacher who just simply kept going with the business of the day and students come by and they don't even acknowledge the students, there's no smile, and I know you're nervous and I know all that kind of stuff and you can forget about it, but I'm just telling you to be conscious of those things. Those were the subtle things that I look for to let me know that, hey, this particular teacher really loves students and they're looking forward to this. It's not just a job or not just a career, although it's going to be all those things at some point in time, but it's personal. So just your interactions with students, how you portray yourself in your philosophy, those types of things. Let your passion come through. You've got teaching experiences going into interviews. You've got those things. So one of the things about standing out is when I look at resumes or when I look at philosophy statements and all those, for the most part, they come off the same. If you come through a reputable program, I'm assuming you know the content. Now I'm going to ask questions, and all of you have touched on that to reaffirm that. But if you want to stand out, let yourself come out. That would be my suggestion to you as a principal and some of the things that I look for. Now once you get that first job, and this has been touched on, one of the things I was always interested in is teachers that were willing to communicate with me. Coming from a science background, I was always particularly interested in how teachers taught science and that sort of thing. And for students that are in my block, we've done some inquiry lessons, and it gets kind of loud sometimes. As a principal, I think it's a great idea when teachers come to me and tell me, hey, I'm doing this inquiry experiment. It may get a little loud, but my kids aren't, going crazy. And as a principal, I appreciated that because I could always maybe go by and see that teacher in action in something other than just a didactic lecture, which is what we resort to when we get in the bind. Let's just be honest. If you're not prepared, if you're not comfortable, a lot of times that's what we do. We just lecture. So as a principal, I always appreciated the first year teacher, second year, whoever, would come by and say, hey, we're going to do this activity. It might get a little loud, and sometimes they would even invite me. And to me, that was just a great way to make a teacher stand out, a first year teacher. Somebody mentioned things about cuts. If it ever comes to that, it's usually the first one's in, first one's out, that sort of thing. But if you've established yourself maybe with the cohort who's come in, and you've done some of those special things and really opened yourself up to the administration, it does ultimately can make a difference. This was already mentioned too, but I had to deal with a lot of this, so I'll re-mention it again. Break room talk, lunchroom talk. Be very careful of that. I don't know how many issues could have been avoided if people just didn't talk more than they should have in a group of peers. Now, your co-teachers are going to be very valuable resources for you. Teaching can be a very lonely profession. Even though you're around kids all the time, you run into challenges that they can't necessarily help you with. So you're going to need that support framework, but please don't turn it into a gripe session every time you get together. And that's the tendency, just to be very honest, because it is high stress, particularly early on, and it does very easily revert itself to that. But just realize, just think of some of the modern things that have happened today with all the technology and stuff. Assume that there's a microphone in the room, it's recording, and it's going to be posted on Facebook before you walk out the door. Because that's pretty much how it happens. Even though it may not be a microphone, somebody's going to post something about something that you said, which may or may not be in context, but the fact that you said it and could be inferred to be in that context really makes a difference. And then you've got to deal with not only angry, possibly co-teachers, but you've got to deal with angry parents. And you've got enough responsibilities to worry about, not to have to worry about that kind of stuff. It's already been talked about a lot about parents, but they are one of your most valuable resources. I love the idea of treating it as a partnership, because that's really what it is. I have a different perspective now as a parent than I did when I first started out, because I know that I'm entrusting my son or daughter, in my case, to someone who's going to see them during the school year more than I do. I don't know if you realize that, but you have more contact time with the kids than the parents do during the school year. And as a parent, from that perspective, I want to know that the teacher has my child's best interest in mind. And don't assume that they do just because you show up for work every day. I love the idea of communicating with them on a positive note, letting them know when good things happen, because invariably what happens, first year teacher, you're out there, you're nervous, you don't want to talk to parents, you don't want to make that phone call, and the first time you have to make it is because something bad has happened. So the first contact you have with the parent is in a negative context. And invariably what happens is, from that point on, that parent sees you in a negative light. I mean, we're just human, that's the way it happens. So I would just implore you to please don't let your first contact with a parent be for negative. I know schools do a pretty good job now with the parent-teacher night, orientations, opening, that sort of thing. That's a great chance. Yes, you're probably going to have some kind of spiel that you do for the whole group, but also take time to meet those parents individually and let them know. Always a good thing if your school is organized enough to know a little bit about that student at orientation, so that maybe you can share something with that parent. I'm really looking forward to having little Johnny in class. I understand he really likes math. That's a great way to really start a positive relationship. These two things were mentioned also, but I'll just reiterate them. As a principal going around to do classroom observations, technology integration is huge, but I would encourage you to make sure your technology has a purpose. One of the things that always frustrated me was to go into a room, and yes, the teacher's using technology, but it was very awkward. It was obvious that they just stuck it in there because some standard told them to. Even had situations where the technology made it worse. I had a high school teacher one time teaching science, and used to take time to really, on the board, outline some of the difficult concepts and go through it with the students and all this sort of stuff. Switched over to PowerPoint. Had these beautiful illustrations, but what happened was he lost teaching time, because what he would do now is just flash the illustration up there, briefly talk them through it, and click to the next slide. And students weren't getting the concept anymore. And what had happened is, before, as I mentioned, he was doing it on a board and talking them through it, letting students come up to the board and interact with it and add things to it. So the technology actually made things worse. So don't just implement technology blindly. Make sure it has a distinct purpose and it's actually helping your instruction. Last thing about technology, this was already mentioned. Do be careful of email. Tones are misread often in emails. Words are used that sound great in your head. And just a pet peeve of mine, and this is just a pet peeve, so you can take it for what it's worth. If you send out emails to parents, please make sure they're grammatically correct. That was always frustrating to me as a principal. And sometimes it'll be used as ammunition against you, particularly if it's just a long history of it. A lot of schools now require things to go through a certain network, and that's why. I know that feels constricting, but it's always good to have people look at your stuff. So we get into text message mode, just type it, send it, it's gone. Take a little more time when you're communicating with parents to make sure that it's very professional, very well done, and very accurate. But if you're dealing with a parent, I'm going to give you some SeaWorld advice. How many of you have been to SeaWorld? At one time there was a study, and this shows you how old I am, it's way back in the 80s. But they did a study, and SeaWorld was one of the best customer service organizations on the planet. And what they found out is they had a very simple method. They call it the SUD method. And I encourage you, if you get in a bind, to use the SUD method. Parents just reaming you out for whatever, you don't know what to do, you got the deer in the headlights look. Remember SUD. I'm sorry, I understand, what can I do? Yes, you did. I'm sorry, I understand, what can I do? And as I think it was Catherine mentioned, what that does is that puts the onus on the parent, if it's a parent in this context, to realize that maybe mistakes were made, probably were, maybe on both sides. But that you're man or woman enough to admit that you possibly made a mistake or did make a mistake, that you understand their concern, and you want to partner with them to help the situation. How much time have I burned already? Talk a lot longer than I thought I would. Just a couple of things. I do remember my first teaching experience. It was a long time ago, but it was actually at the college level. I taught at college before I did at the middle and high school levels. I don't know if you realize, I know you do because you're completing assignments and doing all that, but time is your most precious commodity that you have. How many of you think you could do wonderful things with a group of students if I gave you 18 hours? Not 18 hours straight. Can you do wonderful things with a student in 18 hours or a group of students? Think about this, 36 weeks in a school year. Because of being unorganized or not prepared, you waste 5 minutes a day. How many minutes a week have you lost? 6 minutes, I'm sorry. Make the math easy. 6 minutes a day, 5 days a week. You've lost half an hour, right? How much time is that over a 36-week year? 18 hours. Ooh, we need some math. How long is that?
18 hours.
18 hours. Just 5 minutes a day from bumbling, stumbling, whatever. You've lost 18 hours of instruction time. Now, we gripe a lot, and rightfully so, and as an administrator, I was just as guilty as anyone of encroaching on instructional time with everything under the sun. Most of it that doesn't amount to anything in the big scheme of things. Some of it very important, social activities or whatever. That's an important part of education. But realize that you're in control of a lot more minutes than administration is. And I want you to think about the 6-minute rule. If I just waste 6 minutes a day, I've lost 18 hours of instruction at the end of the year. What could I have done with 18 extra hours? One of the things that I learned over time in both teaching and administration was to see myself from the student's perspective. And I know those in my methods class, we talk about this a lot. See things from their perspective. Things that we just take for granted, things that we just assume that they're going to know, they don't always know it. So you really need to think about those things. And don't take all the recommendations you hear about a student to heart. And what I mean by that, and someone else mentioned this, you're going to hear a lot of things about kids coming in your class. You're going to hear good things, you're going to hear bad things. And you're going to do one of two things with them. You're either going to accept them as true, And in that case, you're going to treat that student differently before they've ever done anything in your class, just because of what somebody else has told you about that student. Two students that I had personally along, use pseudonyms, David and Katie. Early years of teaching, I was actually, I guess, more conscious than I got to be later on, up to a point. But Katie was in my class. This was a chemistry class, high school level. And she came in and everybody told me she can't do math. It was a small school, so you heard everything about everyone. She can't do math. She's horrible. She can't reason. She can't do word problems. Well, what are we going to do in chemistry? Very math intensive, lots of word problems, those sort of things. But I just made it a point that I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to work with her. I'm going to give her a chance to do what she can do, and we're going to get through it. And that particular year, we worked hard, and I saw probably one of the most dramatic changes in a student that I ever experienced. Was it difficult for her? Absolutely. Did she make straight A's? No. But success is not just a grade in a grade book. Contrast that to several years later, when I got kind of lax, let things go a little bit at that particular time in my life, and had a student named David, basically the same situation. Everybody said, he's horrible, he can't do anything, and from day one, I look back, it's one of the most regrettable educational things in my life that I think about. I never gave David a chance. I just listened to all the talk, treated him differently, not necessarily intentionally, but looking back, I can see how I never gave extra effort to help him. Then last time I heard, he had made some horrible decisions in his life. Again, going back to what Jennifer said, not necessarily save the world, but what could I have done better to do my part to save the world? Because we all have that small part in a student's life, as well as in the big scheme of things. So yes, you listen to feedback, you're prepared, but don't just automatically assume that that's how it is. Let students have a chance. Let students have a chance with you. You have unique gifts that the teacher last year didn't have. You may have the gift that he needs or she needs to really make that difference. So if teacher A couldn't get it done, or feels like they couldn't get it done, maybe that's why he or she's in your class this year, because you do have those tools. Last thing I'll say is the whole idea about success and failure. We like to call success in education doing well on a test, making straight A's, and I'm sure if we all got down to it, a lot of us would define educational success that way in this room. But I want you to think of success a little bit differently. I want you to think of success as a student who is putting forth effort, who is constantly persistent and trying to get it done. And your part in that is to come alongside that student and to give them the best support and the best of your training and the best of your experience, just the best of you. And if you do that, that grade on the report card may be a C, but you can both sit down and both know that you did the best that you could. You didn't give up, you kept trying. And a lot of times that feels like more success than the student who makes the 99s on everything. So, thank you.
Okay, to start off, I mean, each of y'all have looked, there's 7 of us, a lot of times, yep, 7 periods of the day, so I'm the last class that y'all are restless for. Keep that in mind, especially the junior high group. I think most of y'all kind of segregated here, but some of y'all will be that last class that your students go to on the first day. They might be restless when they get to you. Anyways, my name's Luke Lyons. I teach a senior methods course in science and see a lot of my girls in the crowd over this way, which I think I came in a little bit too, and to go on what Stephen said, that you hear some perceptions and things. I have been completely blown away by my students so far, so give a little compliment to them. I got graduated here with a BS in biology in 2008. I then finished a master's from Sam Houston in 2009, finished a principalship in 2011, and now back for a PhD. I taught for 4 years at Navasota High School. And y'all might have heard kind of bad things about Navasota being just a little 20 minutes down the road. I loved it. Every minute of it, and I still go back and visit and everything. I student taught the junior high, and at the high school, the way my student teaching was set up is I had a placement for 7 weeks at the junior high, 7 at the high school. By the end of it, I finished my high school 7 weeks. We were kind of in tax testing at that moment. The principal called me in her office, offered me a job on the spot. Okay. Student teaching is going to be a huge thing. Basically, especially if it's in a district you might want to work at, it's a job interview. Okay. I didn't have an interview. My interview was, we have an anatomy and physiology and a biology spot open next year. Do you want it? I said yes. That was my only job interview that I've ever had. Okay. So pretty cool. But I taught there for 4 years. I did use the principalship. I was a summer school principal for 1 year because they decided to do a little thing where basically they would train us to be a principal by giving us summer school responsibilities, and I was over the junior high and the high school campus and told them I did not want to interview for a principal job because I love teaching too much. And I was even asked by professors, what's your favorite part of the week so far? How's everything going with classes? And I tell them that my Tuesday from 2:20 to 3:35 is my favorite part of the week. And that's my class. Because deep down, I am a teacher. And when I got here as a biology major, didn't think that. I actually wanted to go to dental school. Best thing I ever did was get on a wait list and an alternate 2 years in a row for dental school. Few things that I learned teaching that I would have wished I would have known. One thing I actually got before I got in the classroom, and that was to give my students commercial breaks. Okay? Think if y'all would have had just 3 minutes between each one of us up here talking, would you be as restless as you are now? Probably not, okay? Your students are conditioned to think of a commercial break. They're conditioned to think, okay, I'm going to sit here for 5-7 minutes, be entertained, and then, okay, now something else is on, and they're going to either flip, they're going to get flustered, they're going to do something, get fidgety. So I know my girls have heard that from me, but it is a big help. I've also addressed the idea of creativity as an importance, okay? Especially in science. If you kill their creativity young, their creativity's gone, okay? It's definitely something to keep in mind. And one thing I did, high school room that I taught in was one of those old cinder block wall classrooms, ugly. I don't think it had been painted since 1974. Was terrible. I spent a summer up there and painted my classroom. I had a 14-foot T-Rex on one wall. I had a map of the world that had the biomes on it. And I painted the school logo on one wall because then I had school pride. And the students addressed that with me right away, and they saw that and they recognized it. And when you have pride where you are, the students really pick up on that, even in elementary, junior high especially, okay? Because a lot of times when you get to junior high, those students put on a uniform for that school. And when they do that, they really have school pride. So if the teacher has school pride, that's a big thing. One thing that I did not expect was having some students that I personally at first could not relate to. I met one young man when I was doing student teaching in 8th grade. He was bouncing off the walls, jumping off, break dancing in the class. The teacher actually gave him time at the end of class, like 3 minutes before the bell, so he could break dance for everybody. Saw him in 9th grade when he came up, was in IPC, the Integrated Physics and Chemistry class, and he just kind of disappeared that year, didn't know what happened to him. 2 years later, he comes back and he's in my biology classroom because he just got out of jail. I didn't judge him. And I said, hey, how you doing? Called him by his name. And he said, you remember me? I said, of course, can't forget you. Comes in, well, maybe you can't forget him because he was breakdancing, but that right there established a rapport with him where he became my leader in my classroom, where we had labs. I mean, he was a low C student all year, had modifications, and not a lot of people touched on that kind of stuff, so I'm going to in a bit. But he ended up getting my biology award at the end of the year, and I had the principals call me in the office and ask if this was for real. if it was a joke. And that really offended me, one, but I said, no, it's for real. And I saw him walk across the stage last year at graduation. He is at TSTC right now working on going to be a car mechanic and for customization, and really turned his life around. Another student, he disappeared his freshman year. He was across the hall, saw him. He went to juvie his freshman year, had him as a sophomore. He's on a full ride here at A&M now. So you can't change the world, but you can make a difference in a student, and just by treating them as who they should be and who they want to be inside makes a big difference. Another thing that I did is I had a lot of student organization involvement. I was the Honor Society sponsor, the Student Council sponsor, Math and Science team sponsor, everything, okay? By having that, the students saw my involvement, saw my dedication to the school, and they knew that even though I was commuting in from College Station every day, that I was invested in their learning. And just being a sponsor or something, or just helping out, makes a huge difference, and they recognize it. How many of y'all are going to be maybe junior high coaches? Anybody? Okay. Would you like to see another teacher at one of the games support your kids? Yeah, they'd love it. And the kids would love it too, okay? Yeah, it was easy for me to go to a Friday night football game because, I mean, Raptors won the state last year. Pretty fun season to go to. Ninth grade game's not as fun to go to, but when you go to them, it makes a huge difference in those freshmen that you have in the class. Things like that were great. One thing I did too, and this was just more of a personal thing, is I got to know the special ed students that we had in the school too. And my students got to know them because I involved them in things that we would do. And one of the things that we actually had a group, and we brought them here last year when they had the wrestling over at the Reed Arena, and we had a group of special ed students that we came up here with, and they got to go and had the time of their lives. Not only did my students get to see that, but it just feels good to take part in other things outside your four walls that you have, know the rest of the class. They've touched on things like toy drives. One thing I did with an honor society is we had an Earth Day. That was great because students got to see different things. But another thing that I wish I would have known starting out was inclusion students and inclusion classrooms. That was something I had never dealt with, okay? It was definitely different. But having an inclusion classroom, honestly, was probably my favorite class to teach all day. Not only because did I get to see myself helping students that had a harder time, you get to see your students want to help them too. Your students became little teachers in the classroom, and that was really, really neat. So when you have things like that you don't know about, don't be scared by them at all. Like I said, get involved. We had pep rallies. I dressed up in theme every pep rally. Around the school as a pirate, as Papa Smurf, as I've had a blue mohawk before, okay, for blue out days. I mean, get involved. The kids, the teachers that did, the kids appreciated it. And one thing that I can reflect on that is I have, my first students I had are y'all's age right now. And I've had lunch with a few of them on campus because they ran into me. One of them, like Stephen was mentioning about how they'll put something on Facebook right away, he ran into me under the tunnel on Wellborn and said, hey, I ran into Lions, and put it on Twitter for everyone. And the high school knew about it. So when I went there, they were like, hey, you ran into Lee last week. Yep, sure did. It's like, how did you know that? But the floating teachers, we had touched on that as well. Jennifer touched about that, about teaching with the cart. You also could have that as a teacher and lose your conference room during that time because somebody could be floating in your room. And I had that happen 2 out of 4 years. It's tough, but you have to make your adjustments, know what you can do during that time, and know what you can do after school or before school. Great on time. I've tried to do that with my girls this year. So far, I think I've been better with it. But great on time because kids want to know what they did. They want to know how they did. Another thing, avoid parking in the wrong spot on the first day. Okay? Yeah, some teachers have parked in the same spot for 20 years. Don't want to park in theirs. So, you know, when those first in-service days come, don't necessarily be late, but park off to the side where you know no one's going to park. Figure out where the spots are. It's a good little thing. Like I said, go to the games. They'll love you for it. Former students, if you have built a relationship with them then, they'll still have a relationship with you. It's really neat to see that I've ran into 17 former students on campus this year. Not one of them has dodged me, been on the cell phone, tried to get away. They've all come up in their group of friends and said, hey, how's it going? And been like, oh, this is my high school teacher. That's pretty cool. So build a relationship, and if I could leave you with anything, create a legacy not only in the community that you're at, but be that teacher that your students remember. Because all of you could think right now about one teacher that you had that you just completely adored. Be that teacher, and if you're that teacher, then you've definitely done part of your job. So, thanks.